Welcome to the Hogan Mystique. Today's guest is Steve Jenkins, who is a music and record producer and a Brit. So I'm going to be the only one speaking in the wrong form of English today. Sorry. But more importantly, he's also Josie's dad. So that's the most important thing today. But we do want to talk to you about your life, your career, and kind of how you ended up where you are and all the great things you've done in your life. And I do want to plug your book here. He wrote a book called Steve Jenkins, The Futures in History, and it's the most thoroughly I've ever prepared for a podcast. So it was really a great read. So I encourage one of our listeners to go out and get it. Josie has an icebreaker question for you, Steve.
I always do, but just to make a point here, Judd, you're always talking in the wrong English.
No question.
always.
Nobody ever calls me out on it until now. So,
yeah, that's what we're here
You'll
for.
be fine, Judd.
Okay.
So our icebreaker question is, what's keeping you up at nights?
Not a lot, really. I've always slept pretty well. I don't know if it was because I always exhausted myself during the day and then just crashed, but not a lot really has kept me awake at night. You probably do on certain occasions.
Slight
but,
trauma.
Yeah, but as for work and general life, I think I'm in a comfortable place now, and so I've been lucky in my life though that I've always slept pretty well. Yeah. So I don't have any kind of it's this or it's that.
Yeah,
I take life as it comes. Really,
you can sleep anywhere too. That's like one of your superpowers. You can anywhere we go. Bus rides, plane rides, anywhere he can sleep. It's incredible.
I think that was because of all those years, in the early years, the touring, and various styles of touring. So sometimes, I was touring with Queen, and I'm living in the best hotels, Albany hotels, or Marriott hotels, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But when you're doing punk tours in 1977, you're in a van. And you learn to sleep on top of the speakers. So in those early days, I learned to sleep everywhere. And of course, we were going all the time. So you had to be able to sleep in the afternoon. You had to be able to sleep at tea time for an hour. Just to keep going. So
yeah, that reminds me.
I'm a good sleeper.
You're a good sleeper, Dad. It reminds me of Hogan too, because he at the very beginning was sleeping in his car and anywhere he could, because it's just you're on tour and. It's tough when
I've done a lot of sleeping in cars at the side of, the freeway or the motorway, when you've left a concert or something, and then you're driving to the next town and you have the option of staying in a hotel or jumping in a car, driving to the next town and then getting to the hotel early and then, crashing for the day. So, and sometimes you miscue it. And it's 4 o'clock in the morning and you can't make another 2 hours. And you have to pull over the side of the road and sleep in the car for an hour, to get going again. But that was touring back in those days.
I'm always fascinated by that. When I'm a music fan, certainly not in the music business, but, when we go to concerts and you see them put up these big stages, and I know that there's a difference between roadies and the band, but, they roll off a stage at 11:30, whatever the curfew is. And then they're playing in, let's say they're playing in Dallas one night and then Houston the next night is, for a guy that's always kind of valued sleep, even though I don't do it very well, it's just always been interesting to me to think about a band that rolls off a stage with all that adrenaline at 11:30 and has to be ready to go the next night at 7 or 8 or whatever the case may be. And they've got to get 400 miles down the road. And so I just, you see all these big tour buses go down, but those can't be, that's not the Ritz-Carlton rolling down the road. So I do relate, or I've thought a lot about how people like you sleep during the night, rolling down the road like that. So
yeah, well, when you're touring, back in those days, in the early days and everything, especially in the UK, we do 36 dates in 38 or 40 days. So, we were going constantly. And there was never a uniform for the road crew. Yeah. As soon as the gig's over, they start breaking it down the minute you leave the stage, and they're breaking it down, and you can see it all going out backstage of the concert. You know, it's all going out there, and we're still, you know, normally, because I was always with the band, we'd have guests. You know, we actually used to call it the grip and grin. Okay. So, you know, you shake hands and you smile, you know, at the local press and radio and TV. And so we'd come off the stage, there'd be 5-10 minutes where, you know, they're either jumping in the shower or toweling themselves down. And then I'd have one or two of the band members and we'd do what we termed the grip and grin. And then it would depend on whether we were overnight staying in that town or we were moving to the next town. Okay. And sometimes some of the band would stay overnight in the town that we just played, and then I'd go with either the lead singer or the lead guitarist, the ones that do the interviews, and I'd go to the next town because we do interviews in the daytime, before the concert in the next town. You know, so it was always kind of different depending on what interviews and things you had to do, you know. But I've got to say, you know, I mean, I was in my 20s back then, and I was touring, and I was loving it. You know, I was kind of, wow, you know, how did I get to do this? Right. You know, so, and it was constant touring. So,
yeah, I always think that's just, you know, you're kind of running on adrenaline all the whole tour, and you know, I'm sure the roadies maybe have some other methods of getting sleep or getting energy, but you know, it's just fascinating. So I want to go back a little bit to your childhood and kind of, you know, here's where the wrong English comes in. Walsall, is that how you pronounce it?
Walsall.
Okay, yeah. Well, we'll go with that. I have a Texas accent, so it's not going to sound right.
And you'd never heard of Walsall until
I had never heard of
weeks
it,
ago.
not until I read the book. I hadn't heard of it before. So what kind of town is that, and where is that, kind of in the English countryside? Or
it's 9 miles north of Birmingham.
Okay.
Yeah, so you know Birmingham is in the centre of England, and Birmingham is the industrial area. So it's, I guess, in America, the similarity would be Detroit. So it's the car manufacturing area. So they always used to say, you grow up around Birmingham area, you know, you do one of two things: you either make the cars or you sell them. Okay. You know, and so, but Birmingham is the second biggest town in the UK. So it's London, there's Birmingham, there's Manchester. Okay. There's always a little rivalry between Birmingham and Manchester on which is the second city, but it is Birmingham, you know, because of its size. And so Walsall is 9 miles north of Birmingham. So I guess Walsall is a place where if you were moving to Birmingham for work and you needed a starter home, you would probably head for Walsall because the properties are cheaper. Okay. So I think, you know, when I was born and raised in that town, it was probably a town of maybe 80,000 people. Okay. And it's more connected to Birmingham nowadays than it was back, because, you know, Birmingham spreads. Sure. And so Walsall is almost in it, although Walsall people will never agree to being Birmingham. So it's a small town, really. I mean, I don't think I went to Birmingham probably with my mom on a shopping trip when I was young, but I was not in and out of Birmingham until later life, you know.
So one thing I was kind of taken by was your relationship with your father. And I know he died when you were, how old were you when he passed away?
15.
15. So one thing I was telling Josie was, you know, you talked about how he had a job where I think he had Thursdays off. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I think about times with my dad, and, you know, my dad and I were golf and college football, which is a different football than y'all know. But I wonder how those times with you and going to your dad, you talked about going to Arboretum and going to the zoo and different things in the car, maybe listening to music, how that kind of shapes your life going forward, you know, where you're almost kind of, and I don't want to get too psychological here, but almost trying to recapture those moments as you produce music later on in life, those good moments with your dad.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, a lot of what I did with music was started with my dad, really, in that, you know, he was a drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, he didn't have lessons drumming. He sat down on the drums and started playing, and then got in a band, and they became well known locally.
Mm-hmm.
He was also a tap dancer, and so he could dance.
A lot of rhythm in this guy.
Oh yeah, I mean, he could dance, and he. I remember as a kid, he made a board, and he used to put the board down in the kitchen, and then he'd put a record on, and he'd dance in the kitchen. You know, me and my sister used to think it was really funny, but you know, he was fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, and all the people that knew him always said what a great dancer he was. And when I was young, we used to get all those TV shows from America on a Wednesday night. So we'd get Perry Como, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, all those shows. And my dad had his chair, which was facing the TV. And, you know, he'd go, "Come on, little man." And so I'd walk over and he'd sit me in his chair. So I'd be 5, 6, something like that. He'd sit me in the chair next to him. And then he would, you know, as guest stars came on these shows, he would say to me, "This is a good singer. This one, not so good. This one's fantastic." And so I was getting this education at 6 years old on these international stars, really, from America, on, you know, who was good, who was bad, who was indifferent. How much, I mean, I must have caught some of it, you know. I remember that, as you mentioned, he had Thursdays off because, you know, he ran the cooperative shoe departments, about 8 stores he was manager of. And so he'd work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, have Thursday off, work Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. So on occasions, which a lot of my school friends didn't appreciate, he would write to the school and he would say, "I'm taking Steve." You know, he took me specifically to a cricket match and told the school that he needed the day off because he wanted me to experience international cricket. And also one day he said to me, he wrote to school and he said, "Steve's having the day off today." And I said to him, what are we doing, Dad? And he went, "We're going to the movies and we're going to see Funny Girl because I'm going to show you the greatest female singer you will ever see," which was, of course, a 19-year-old Barbara Streisand. And, you know, to be honest, all these years later, he was right.
Sure.
Streisand is probably the greatest female singer, you know, that there's been in the last 60, 70, 80 years.
Sure. Wow. So, you know, in the parallel with you, with Hogan, is, you know, his dad died at an early age too. And so that kind of having to grow up a little faster. And
You do.
And having to become a man faster.
Yeah.
And it's certainly hard, I know, when it happens. But I don't think you fill this book the way you do, maybe without that experience, or at least that kind of, you know, early maturity.
Yeah.
Is that the way you feel? Or?
I mean, certainly that was a life-changing moment. And, you know, my father, you know, who obviously knew he'd not got long left, when he was clear of mind, he used to sit me down and he used to try and give me as much education from his life to mine to prepare me for the future, because he knew he wasn't going to be there. You know, so he gave me a lot of life lessons in the last couple of months of his life, you know. So it was important, and also, you know, I remember sitting there with him, and you know, it was coming towards the end, and he sat me down and he said, I want you to do 2 things for me, Steve. One, I want you to look after your mother, but your mother is actually pretty strong and she can look after herself. But the one thing you definitely will do is, no matter what, and for your life, you will look after your sister, because she's my little girl, you know. And I took that to heart, really, and I pretty much did look after my sister, I think. Hopefully she'd agree. But I certainly tried, you know, through all those years, and when she had difficult moments, I was definitely there trying to solve the problem, you know. So it was without doubt, you become adult, you know, almost overnight, even though you can't quite cope with it, you know. It puts different things in your mind all the time as you're addressing different situations. And I think you address different situations because of that to your friends, you know, who have their mom and dad, or, you know, it's a different moment. And I think it makes you tough. Something's taken away from you, and you have to become tough and strong and probably determined in the way you go forward. I mean, you know, I'm delighted, by the way, to be here. Anything associated with Ben Hogan for me is, you know, he's definitely a hero of mine, you know, because of his independence. And his straightforwardness, you know, his brutal kind of dedication, and actually the thing that I like the best, he did it his own way. You know, he kind of, whatever problems faced him in playing golf and the way he went forward, he did it his own way, and has total respect from me.
Well, I think that, you know, great golf, and great music, or producing great music, and deciding to go into those fields is not for soft-handed people. You know, I mean, you got to be tough. And I just think that, you know, if you lived in, I don't know, what's a nice area in London? If you lived in a nice area in London with
Hampstead.
Yeah, if you lived in Hampstead with you know, a dad that you know, made a bunch of money and was there your whole life, I just wonder if your life had gone that way, or you would have, you know. It's same thing with Mr. Hogan. If he had his dad the whole way, if he had to go to Glengarden and caddy and meet Marvin Leonard and kind of build his life on his own. And I'm not suggesting you did it all on your own, but you certainly had to do a lot of it yourself, and that made you tough. And what came through in this is a really, really hard business that there's no guarantees from day to day. I mean, you can produce a Queen record and the next day be out on the street, right?
That's true. It's well, you know, especially in its heyday. So I think the record business in its heyday, from say when rock and roll happened, you know, in the mid 50s, that exploded all those vinyl sales and everything. And then of course it developed into the 60s. Then the Beatles happened. When the Beatles happened, that just, you know, it went into outer space, you know, in terms of sales and everything. So when an industry is generating that much money, it also attracts a lot of people that probably you wouldn't want to be in that business, you know. So and some pretty tough people too, you know, because there's a lot of money generated. So, you know, it was a tough business. I never wanted any of our kids to be in the record business, you know, and obviously they all knew, you know, what I'd done and the records and met artists and done all of that. And whenever they were sort of leaning towards being in the record business, I was like, you know, because if you want to be in the record business, you have to, you're going to get rejection, and it's going to be rejection day after day and week after week, and you know, in the end you have to embrace it, really, right. And fight your way through it, and most people don't, right? And it hurts, right? You know, Josie hears me talk about this all the time. I'm with my son, he's 12, and he's starting to figure out which sport he wants to play, and he shows a lot of promise in a lot of sports, and he's a perfectionist, and so he's not like me in the sense of I kind of enjoy the journey of it. And when he hits a bad golf shot, he goes, well, I can't do this, you know, and I always tell him, you know, to play soccer or to play American football or to play other sports, there's room for kind of, you know, creativity. In golf, you're going to get hit in the face sometimes and hit it in the water, hit it out of bounds, and you're going to have a bad moment. And you're out there all alone. And I do think that it's hard to teach kids, and hard to want your kids to go through that, but it's hard to teach kids that sometimes you got to go through those tough times, right? So I think in every life you have to go through some tough times. Really, I don't think any of us get excused from that. You know, it's I suppose it's degrees of pain. You know, and what happens as you go down the road. You know. Well,
so I don't want to step all over Josie here. So Josie, it's your questions. I have a lot to talk to you about, but I do want to get to some of the stuff. But Josie, if you want to.
I just wanted to add to that one line in the book, that when your dad had passed, your mum woke you up in the morning and said, Steve, I'm going to say Steve, it's weird, but Steve, your dad's gone. Go get Helen up, get her to school, be brave. And I think nowadays when something like that happens, we go to months and months of therapy, and we don't go to school. We kind of sit in it, and just like the reflecting back to you taking on that responsibility instantly of getting Helen to school, and your mum putting, that responsibility on your shoulders. It just shows a lot of grit. I just think that's incredibly tough, and I'm really impressed by that.
Well, my mother was pretty tough. So I guess my father was artistic and calm, and only really spoke, when he'd got purpose. And, he never hit me. Never, not once in my entire life did he ever, cuff me round the back of the head. And he always said, if I can't talk to you and make you see it, then I'm not going to bother. So I will talk to you, and, you'll understand it or you won't. But if I hit you, that will not help. My mother, on the other hand, she didn't mind dishing it out. And,
good balance.
She was seriously mentally tough, and but I always say that without my mom, I would not have achieved the things that I achieved. She was consistently brutal in driving me forward, and her whole point was I had to honor my father's name.
Yeah. That's lovely.
That was.
And I always think that that's the other side of that. When you lose a parent early, is that the other parent has to take on both parent roles, and so that's hard.
She did.
And you mentioned that, and I remember this in the book where I just thought it was a funny quote. When you moved to LA, and I think your diary entry, 2 weeks in, you said, "Can we cuss on the podcast?"
Yeah.
Okay. LA people are full of shit. I've been here 2 days. I know why everybody needs an ambulance. And it made me think. This is a guy who's grown up, and he's had to be real. He can't be fake, right? And so, and out there, everybody's trying to pretend like they're somebody they're not. And you've never gotten that luxury to do that. So,
No. I mean, here's a fun. I don't think this is in the book, but here's a story, right? So, I'm growing up in a small town in the middle of England, and you see Los Angeles, and it's the land of dreams, and in the 60s, as I'm getting to 13, 14, 15, it's the Beach Boys and it's California girls, and they all look like goddesses. They're all walking around in their bikinis, and it's on the beach and the sun's shining,
right.
And my God, this is paradise, right? So I don't get to Los Angeles actually until I'm maybe 26 or 27 years old. So it was a long time. I didn't get to travel that early because I was working, trying to get somewhere. So anyway, I'm with a band, and we're flying into Los Angeles. And when you fly into Los Angeles, you kind of come down early and you fly across the city before you arrive in LAX. So it's a very slow drop like that, and sometimes that affects people's ears. So anyway, I'm flying into LA. The first time I'm going to land, California girls. This is fantastic. It's all brilliant. I'm now, big time, because I'm arriving in LA as a 27-year-old. This is fantastic. Anyway, the flight affects my ears, and so I'm in pain, and the air hostess comes around and she says, "Oh, this is the way we deal with it. They put cotton wool in boiling water, and they put cotton wool in a plastic cup, and then you put it on your ears like that." So I'm going into Los Angeles, superstar, with 2 plastic cups on my ears, and it's dripping as well, because the water's coming out of the, and the rest of the band are looking at me, and you can imagine I took a lot of stick at that for a good couple of years.
Oh, I love that.
My arrival in Los Angeles.
I love that. So your own British invasion, I guess.
Yeah. I don't think it's the way McCartney did it.
That's why I had the long hair.
Yeah.
So I guess back to you listened to the Elvis. You said kind of grabbed you early on, right?
Oh yeah.
I grabbed everybody, and still grabbing people these days with his music, and then kind of the Beatles kind of make it all real to you. So and that was kind of when you started more or less in the business, right? Where you started with the DJ.
Well, the Beatles happened when I was 10 years old.
Okay, so a little bit later.
So 63, the Beatles happened. But that completely changed. The Beatles changed my mentality in that here are 4 lads that are basically street kids from Liverpool. And they go to that level of success. And when that happened over those first couple of years, 63, 64, 65, and then they make the movie, and then they crack America and they are world stars. It sort of proved to me that it didn't matter where you came from.
Right.
It doesn't matter where you came from, it doesn't matter what your opportunities were or weren't. If you had something or stuck at something, you could actually achieve. Whereas I think before the Beatles, I didn't kind of think that was possible. Elvis Presley, world star. I'm not going to be Elvis Presley. I didn't even understand what record labels were then. Right. So, to me, it was just, he's fantastic. But when the Beatles happened and it was closer to home, and then, they were on TV, and they did not change their accents. Right. They spoke like Liverpool street kids, live on the BBC News, and so I'm like, wow. Right. So the Beatles definitely changed everything for me, and I think put opportunity in my head for the first time. I can, if I want to be involved in music or whatever I want to do, I can do it. Right. Can't be as successful as the Beatles, but I could do it. And so that created opportunity for me. And then, that inspired. I was addicted to records and music. There's no, when I look back, it was addiction. There's no two ways about it. I couldn't get through a day without playing a record, listening to the radio, going to a record shop. Whenever I went to any kind of town anywhere in the world, or through all those years, first port of call after checking in the hotel, straight where's the record store? What are they selling? Who's the local band that's selling? All that kind of stuff. It's a total addiction.
So what was your first job in the music business?
Well, I was a DJ to start with. So
what does a DJ look like? What do you do in that
time? Radio 1, which still is the big national pop station, I suppose, in the UK, but it started in 1967. So it exploded, and it made the radio presenters, who were called DJs back then, nationwide stars. And so then they'd go out and do concerts. And they used to have the Radio 1 Roadshow, which was a lunchtime show, and it used to go, in the summer, it would go to a different town all over England. So it came to Walsall, and an American guy, the Emperor Roscoe, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Yeah, Mike Pasternak, his name is. Okay. But Emperor Roscoe became this big star on Radio 1, and he had he could speak American, obviously, so he sounded super cool. And, he was the Emperor Roscoe. So anyway, the Emperor Roscoe is playing a gig in Walsall at lunchtime, live on the radio. And I managed to get in there. The queues were just monstrous at this time. And the way I got in was there was a hot dog stand right by the entrance. And I'm at the back of the queue. I got there early, but I'm still at the back of the queue. They must have been there from 6 a.m. And a mate of mine was with me, and I went, I'm going to go and get a hot dog, and then I'm going to mingle in with the crowd and stand at the front of the queue. So my pal, his name was Steve Baldwin, he went, I can't do that. I went, well, I tell you, I've got to get in there, and I've got to see Emperor Roscoe. So if I've got to be a bit dubious in doing that, I'm going to do it. So I went down to the front of the queue, bought the hot dog, and as I'm eating the hot dog, I just kind of sidled into the queue as to where I was, and I got in and saw Roscoe. And again, when I saw Roscoe, because I saw him warming up before it went live on the radio, and I saw what he was doing. So, he's playing records. It's not all that scratching business.
Right.
that he's playing records, and he's talking to the audience, and he's an entertainer. And I watched him, and I was pinned to the back wall watching him, and I thought that I can do that. That's it. And so, but to be honest, it took me about 3 years to save the money to buy equipment. It took me about 3 years to build a record collection that was big enough for me to go out and play gigs. And then I started to play gigs, eventually working 6 nights a week, so I'd go to the club at 8 o'clock at night. They'd open the club at 9. I'd start playing records or comparing cabaret acts that were coming along, if it was a dinner and dance or just a club venue, and then I'd play records until 2 in the morning, and I did it 6 nights a week.
And you had a day job too. And you worked were you already at Barnaby?
Barnaby's was the first club that employed me 6 nights a week in Lichfield.
And then during the day you were working at a furniture store?
It wasn't actually a furniture store. My mother was insistent that I paid my stamp and tax. So even if I worked because I was getting paid cash in the evenings, they from the door money that they got in the nightclubs, they then pay the DJ cash. So I'm collecting good amounts of cash. And she said, you're not paying any tax and you're outside of the system, so you have to work in the day. So I was trying to find jobs that, didn't kind of, I wasn't getting in till 3, 4 in the morning, and then I'm having to go to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. So actually it wasn't a furniture store. I was driving a van and I was delivering desks. And then when you get to the place where the desks are, you have to put the desks up. Right at that point in time, I'd also injured my knee playing football. So I'm limping, but fixing desks. And then I'm finishing work at 5 o'clock and I'm going home and I'm eating, and then I'm going to the nightclub and I'm working 6 hours at night. And then, after a few months, I was completely exhausted. But, my mum was pretty determined that, I was going to have a proper job.
Yeah.
Even if the proper job was delivering desks, I didn't think it was a good job.
On a broken leg.
Yeah, but it was a big swollen knee.
Oh no.
So you mentioned your dad early on would sit with you and say, listen to I assume Sinatra and those kind of guys say, this guy's great, this guy's no good. Is that kind of the same experience with DJs? Did that give you a good education about this is what kids like, and this is this music really moves them, and this doesn't, or did you have kind of an innate sense of that already?
No, I think I learned it in the nightclubs.
Okay.
Pete Waterman, who was a partner of mine, we made records together for years, and had lots of hits and all that kind of stuff. And Waterman always says, the reason why me and Steve was successful is we played all those nights in nightclubs. So, you're playing all sorts of different records, because I was getting a lot of records from America, which made me special, because I was getting imports from America.
There's no Amazon back then. So.
No. So, I'm introducing people in Birmingham to records that they hadn't heard before. And so you're playing all sorts of different records and you get an instant reaction. People either move towards the dance floor and start dancing, or they're on the dance floor and you play a record and they move away from the dance floor. And so you get to understand rhythms, and you see what drives people and different styles of people too, on and off dance floors. And so Waterman always says, what we learned in nightclubs, and that's why we could pick hit songs and hit records. And so I played nightclubs from, 20 to 27 years old. I did 7 years of it. So, not always 6 nights a week.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so, when I was working in the day, towards the end, I'd do the big nights. I'd do Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously I got paid more for doing Thursday, Friday, and Saturday than I got paid for doing Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
So I cut the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesdays and played Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But certainly, without a doubt, watching an audience live moving to and from a dance floor, critical.
Yeah, and I think in all different types of music, right? Or different. I think one thing that's interesting about your career is, you mentioned Queen, who you worked with, and you also worked with, I think you said Will Smith and like Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake, who are all
NSYNC,
different. And
Backstreet Boys.
but there's got to be a common theme because, just like Queen, it doesn't hurt to have a voice like that, right?
Freddie, special.
Amazing. But, you see, just for one person to be able to say, Freddie Mercury's got it, Will Smith's got it, Britney Spears has got it, and they're all different. So I just...
I mean, I had nothing to do with I just toured with Queen. I didn't pick Freddie or Queen or sign them to EMI, I did just kind of make that clear. I did sign Britney Spears to Jive Records, and I definitely signed Will Smith. Do you want to know the Will Smith?
Sure.
Yes, tell the Will Smith story. It's
Okay.
It's brilliant.
So I'm in New York, and there was a thing called the New Music Seminar, where a lot of people from around the world would descend on New York for 4 or 5 days, and I'd started a small label called Champion Records. I was just trying to I had a few friends in America that were making records, and I wanted to put those records out in England, and I was just trying to get into the American record business in some way, and I hired a guy called Paul Oakenfold. Paul Oakenfold would go on to be a big name DJ around the world and have a couple of hit records himself. But at this time, he's 18 years old, and he's a kid, and I liked him, and he was hustling in New York, and so I said, you should come work with me at Champion Records and go and find me a few records, and if I like them, we'll put them out. So it was all kind of loose and exciting, and I'd be paying him in cash. I'll go, here you go, Paul, just go and do that. So I mean, they were different days.
Yeah, right.
They were different days. So anyway, Paul brings me a record, and it's "Girls Ain't Nothing But Trouble." It's by Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. Nobody's heard of Judd. They're both still at school. So he plays me this record, and it's got a sample in from a 60s TV show. When you Google it, you'll hear it. But it's got a sample in from a 60s TV show, which I knew, and then it had this great little rap about girls ain't nothing but trouble, as we know.
Mom, just kidding.
And so I hear this record, and I loved it. And so I said to Paul, get to Philadelphia. Here's some money, go to Philadelphia, find out who it is, buy the record for me for England. So anyway, Paul went to Philly, and I don't know, I can't remember now how much that Will and Jeff wanted for the record. It was like $2,000 or something. So I said, yeah, sent $2,000, got the tapes, put the record out in England. So the first hit record that Will Smith ever had was on Champion Records in England, and it made the top 20, got to number 19, I think. Wow. And it was Girls Ain't Nothing But Trouble. And I only actually did that one record with Will and Jeff at that time because they weren't signed to me directly. I just licensed their record. And then, of course, a few years later, I'm managing director of Jive Records, and Will and Jeff signed to Jive Records, and then we have all those other hits.
You did get
later
jiggy
on.
with it, didn't you?
Sorry?
Get jiggy with it?
Get Jiggy With It was, Will actually did that with Sony. That was just after we'd, finished working together, and Will was becoming the massive TV film star, because that.
Oh, he did the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, right?
He did, yeah.
I
did do that.
I remember when I was a kid, that was one of the first raps I ever was allowed to listen to, because I was kind of in nascent period of like gangster rap.
Yeah,
My parents let me
yeah.
listen to Will Smith, and I listened to Parents Just Don't Understand.
Yeah, we made that record.
And I feel like that, I could relate to that much more than I could relate to whatever Eazy-E and those guys were rapping about.
Yeah, I remember Eazy-E too.
Probably much more dangerous for me to listen to Parents Don't Understand than Straight Outta Compton.
Yeah.
Anyway, I those were. It's just interesting to me that those. Was rap even popular in England at that time, or you
No.
kind of so you grab it saying this just has something. So what is that something that you heard in that first record that you bought for them?
Well, the first Will Smith record, or Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. I mean, Jeff, fantastic DJ. You know, I mean, what Jeff did underneath Will's rapping was world class.
Okay.
You know, I mean, he's a world class DJ, a producer in that way. So that particular record was a lot to do with the sample that they'd used,
Okay.
and then Will's easy way of rapping. But when I started to actually, the thing that changed my mind about rap, because I listened to it early on, and it was pretty raw. You know, in the very early days before it's become popular, it's definitely ghetto music, and primarily it's black. So, you know, in the early days, and I was listening to it, and I could see it building and growing. You know, on the underground, but that wasn't happening in England. And we signed an artist, Boogie Down Productions. This guy had got some class, but he was an underground rapper. And I went to this function in England, and there was a radio promoter there, and I knew her really well, and she said, "Oh, you know, I brought my sister along." Her sister was like 20 years old or something, and she said, "Okay." She was doing something with some artist. She said, "Can you just stand by my sister, make sure she's okay?" So anyway, I was talking to her sister, and her sister said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I run Jive Records." And so I'm thinking she'd talk about our pop records and everything, and she said to me, "Oh, Jive Records, Boogie Down Productions." I was thinking. And she knew more about Boogie Down Productions than I did as managing director of Jive Records. She told me the whole history of this whole thing. And I was thinking, if a 20-year-old white girl is getting into this music's going to cross over. So after that evening and that conversation, I was then researching rap music and going, this thing could really happen. You know, this is kids' street music. And so, you know, we then started to get more and more involved in it. And then, you know, we sang fair few artists. I mean, I still love Will Smith because I love the fun and the way he raps.
Yep.
And, you know, but we signed a Tribe Called Quest, and you know, Q-Tip in a Tribe Called Quest is probably one of the best rappers I've ever heard. You know, so we had success with other rappers that were more underground. And
Well, it reminds me of what you mentioned about the Beatles. They're just four street kids from Liverpool, and I think probably a lot of people saw the same thing in rappers that you saw in the Beatles. Is wait a second, this isn't just, you know, Barbra Streisand that, you know, that can make it, but these kids that are on the street corner that can talk about their truth and whatever that is. And the truth on the street corner in Compton may not be the exact same it is in Fort Worth, but we can relate to that.
Well, we understand it, don't we?
Right.
You know, when you got to listen to it, you got to understand it. Yeah, but I think, you know, when you get to a position of your own record label, you're always searching for what is the new music. You know, in the heyday of the record business, it was driven by young people. They were the people that bought the records in their millions. You know, I mean, you sold records to other age groups too, but the driving factor was young people. So you had to kind of stay in touch with what was the new movement of music that the young kids were listening to.
Right.
I can't do that anymore.
Well, and I guess that brings the one question I wanted to ask is, and this may be a bad question, but what's wrong with the music business today, and how do we fix it? So, you know, it just seems like that. I love the Who, and
Yes.
they always told a story to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And the bands I love tell stories, and you can feel it in their emotion. Now I feel like a lot of bands they care about making money, and not that Who didn't care about making money,
Yeah.
but it just seems like that maybe it's not as driven by the young, kind of the young experience anymore, and it may be driven by something else. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but you tell me.
No, well, I think that the glory years, every industry has glory years, if they make it big. So I think the glory years of the record business were 1955, probably when rock and roll happened, and that went through really until the new rock and roll happened, which was the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So when that kind of got a grip around 2000, and then they're starting to be able to deliver music in a different way.
Napster and that kind of stuff. Right?
Well, I remember those guys from Napster. They came over and they got all the big guys from the record business at the time. We went to this thing, and the guys from Napster come on stage, and they're talking about how the world is going to be, with the internet and everything. And a lot of heads of record companies, like Warner Brothers and Sony and people like that, and I'm sitting with all of those guys, and they're going, "No, that's never going to happen," and no. And the thing that got me was this kid is standing on stage addressing the record business. We're powerful dudes at this time, we're the dream makers. We're making people happen or not happen, and we're paying them. So, we're big time guys. This kid gets on stage and basically tells us, if you don't do a deal with us, we're going to take your business and we're going to run it, and you're going to be left with nothing. And I thought, well, the other guys get upset about it, and they want, this is never going to happen. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, this kid's got that confidence to address the record business like that and then tell you he's going to take your business away from you. I said to a couple of the boys, managing directors of record label, I said to them, I think we should go and talk to this kid, because he's either got a massive ego or really big balls. Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that on the podcast.
I said earlier.
Yeah, right. So you can cut it anyway, Don. But so and sure enough, that movement, which is why I always say that the internet is the new rock and roll. Mm-hmm. For those kids that were around at that time, it is their rock and roll. Mm-hmm. It changed their life, just like rock and roll did in the 50s. It changed their life, and that in itself changed the record business. So what we knew as the record business is never ever going to be there again. It's gone.
Okay.
It was 1959 to 2002 probably. Mm-hmm. And since then it has evolved and come into a different, well, some parts of it are good though,
No, I was being a little bit hyperbolic there, but
yeah.
And I do think, when I was a kid, we would listen to whole albums all the way through.
Yes.
You get an album and you go in your bedroom and you sit there and listen to it and think about some girl that broke your heart or whatever.
Exactly. And you're looking at the cover too.
That's right.
And reading all the sleeve notes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I still love even, I'm a big Pearl Jam fan, and they still try to recreate that experience by putting out albums and not singles, right?
Yes.
But I also understand that my kids, no way they're ever going to listen to, they love when singles come out, because that's a new song for them, and then they listen to it, they digest it, then they're ready for the next one, and they just, the kids today, if it's a youth-driven business, aren't going to listen to an album, so they have to react to that, right?
Not anymore. That's but that's the way the industry has developed, really. And also, I also think it's to do with, Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, all those fast-moving things. Mm-hmm. And so the young people of today, they're changing their mind every few seconds, if you know what I mean. It's hitting them off and they're all checking all these different things, platforms, and then I watch them too. Sometimes, Josie, when you were younger, when you were 13, I used to watch you a lot on what records you were interested in, and and it is quick. It's always quick. You know, if they don't get it in, 20 seconds, they move on.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, certainly with my generation, we'd sit and we'd put the record on and we'd consider the record. Whether we liked it or whether we didn't, we'd consider it for a lot longer. It wasn't fast and impulsive like it is today.
I'm like that too. If a song doesn't catch me in the first 30 seconds, I move on.
You're a young person I'm talking about.
I'm a youngster.
Yeah, the thing I like though, Josie, about the new way that people listen to music or whatever is a young person today, when they listen to records, it can be an artist of this moment, like you went and saw Taylor Swift the other day. It could be Taylor Swift, or it could be the Rolling Stones from 1964.
That's exactly true.
And there
right.
is no time difference between those records. They either like it or they don't like it.
That's
and
really
I think there's something really positive about that.
I mean, on my way here, I listened to an NSYNC song, and then a Taylor Swift song, and then Purple Rain by Prince.
Yeah.
And it's exactly true. I'm interested in all sorts of different music, but it does have to catch me. And
Prince was really little. I stood next to Prince, and he was here. The only reason I met Prince was he was playing a gig in Edinburgh, and he wasn't selling tickets. It was a big gig, and he wasn't selling enough tickets. And I had a band called The Time Frequency that only sold records in Scotland, but they were massive in Scotland. They didn't really sell records in England, and so they said to me, "Can you get The Time Frequency?" Prince's people said to me, "Can you get The Time Frequency to play the Edinburgh gig, because that'll bring the crowd?" So I went, yeah, sure, so went up there, and then, Prince invited me to say hello, and so he came down, and I was going up to his suite or whatever, and got in the lift, and I'm standing in the lift, and I'm thinking, this guy is really small. He comes on stage, and the way he moves and everything,
presence.
you think he's a big lad. He's not. He's really small. Anyway, I digress.
I think,
I went off.
No. You can, anytime you want to talk about, I think Prince is a genius. So
there's no question. No question.
And he's an interesting guy, and it kind of brings me to the question of, how do you know when you see a star? Because I think that no matter what genre of music you like, you look at a guy like Prince, you look at the Rolling Stones, or you look at Britney, or you look at Taylor Swift, right? And I always tell people, my daughter is 7, and she loves Taylor Swift, and I don't get it, but she makes my daughter smile. That's all I care about.
Hey, you're talking to a Swiftie here.
Right.
Gentle with your choice of words.
Even if that's not my type of music, I know that Taylor Swift's a star. I look at her, and I don't know how to quantify that. Do you know how to say that? Like, what makes her a star? What makes Prince a star, other than just raw talent? But is there something that kind of unique that goes through all of them?
I think when you look at the record business and when you look at artists, the whole thing is based around the song. To start with. So if all these artists are unknown at some point, but if you look at the first record of every artist that succeeds, the first one to hit, they may put out a couple that don't hit while they're learning the game, but the first one that hits, you should then, so whatever Taylor Smith's whatever Taylor's first record was that hit big, if you go and listen to that record and analyze it, you will find some treasures in that record. There are moments in that record that appealed to millions of people, whatever it might be. It might be the lyric, it might be the chorus line, or it may just be a couple of lines in a verse that trigger emotion to millions of people. I think she's great, by the way.
Yeah,
I think she's great, and I listened to a lot of her early stuff. Not so much of the stuff after when she moved to New York, when she went more kind of pop. But when she started in the country stuff, that kid could write. That kid could write at 17, 18 years old. She could write.
And also talking, just really quick to go back to albums, Taylor Swift is the only artist where I listen to the entire album still, and I will listen to it on repeats, and I fall in love with every song at a different stage in my life. I mean, there are songs that I didn't relate to in her Red album that I now relate to, so it's amazing when you go back with her. It's interesting.
She writes life stories, that's for sure.
And she's one of those that I always wonder about. Madonna reinvented herself all the time.
Oh, 10 times.
And Taylor's kind of stayed kind of who she is. She's grown up, right? But she's kind of stayed who she is. And so I always, if I were in your position and Madonna came to me and said, I've been the material girl now, and now I'm going to be the truth or dare girl or whatever I'm going to be. I'd be like, well, are we throwing away the golden goose here? So there's a certain amount of genius in being able to reinvent yourself too and be something you're not.
I think you can only do that over a long period of time. I think, I don't know. I mean, I met Madonna a couple of times when, she did the whole Britney promotion thing when many years ago when Britney was having a tough time. Madonna stepped in, wearing Britney t-shirts. So I met her a couple of times. But I think longevity enables you to reinvent yourself. And probably the greatest of all was David Bowie, because Bowie reinvented himself all the time, and there was a lot of times I thought, you don't need to do that, David. You're a big star. You're a big star. All those records, songs that you've written, you don't need to do that. But that theatrical part was part of Bowie as well. And I think Madonna was, fairly brutal in the way she pursued her career, but you also got to remember, everybody turned Madonna down. Madonna, although we all look at her as this iconic woman, in the early days, that girl got turned down by everybody. I mean, nobody wanted Madonna. Not good enough singer, not good enough dancer, not a songwriter at the time. I think I'm doing the table tapping thing you spoke to me about.
It's all that rhythm.
Yeah.
Did you see me? I was like,
yeah.
You're doing it now.
You're
stop tapping the table.
Your table taps are on the 2 and the 4. Mine are on the 1 and 3. I guess have there been people that you've seen? I guess there have been, but people that come to mind that you say, man, that person should have made it, and they didn't.
Always.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of people that are incredibly talented as guitar players or songwriters, but they have something that's not, they can't give everything. They can't be open enough to do it. And no, I'm going to do it, but it's got to be in this way. And I've sat with many artists and gone, if you do it that way, it ain't going to work. You're now doing it for you. And you have to be doing it for the public. If you can't transpose that into doing it for the public, we ain't going to go anywhere.
That's interesting.
So, and I've had many of those conversations, Josie, with a lot of artists too. And some of them, it broke my heart, because I'm thinking, this kid's really good, but he can't open his mind.
Do you think that comes from a place of fear or ego or?
A combination of all those things, I think. Lack of understanding, ego, fear, all of those things.
Because I'm one of these weak people, not from LA, but from here, that needs an analyst, like you would say.
I wasn't being offensive.
I would say, one thing you learn is that the true intimacy is in vulnerability, and I think that a lot of these artists have connected with. That's to me as a amateur, not like you, a professional. But that's the one thread you see through great artists is that they really connect with their fans. And I just wonder if some of these people, because of that fear, they don't connect because they're like, well, I'm going to do it this way, even though there's this whole swath of people that may like me if I just opened up a little bit more on this other.
Yeah, just flipping that just slightly, the easiest people to deal with, McCartney, I'm just tapping the table again. McCartney, Elton John, those really big stars. When you kind of work with them, they're everyday guys. They're not big on themselves. and you can communicate with them easily. And then when you start to do business with them and you talk about how are we going to achieve this, or you're planning an album and singles and all the rest of it, they get it.
Yeah.
They get it. There's no argument. They understand what they're doing, and there is a difference between that kind of level of artists and some of the mid-range ones that stop them becoming that level of artists, I mean, Elton. I mean, a bit wild, Elton,
Oh, I love Elton John.
Yeah,
too.
and he's
He's just
his
at his
heyday.
last tour.
Yes, he's on the last leg of it, actually. Yeah.
So
Good guy, Elton.
we have this debate in the golf world all the time: Hogan, Tiger, Nicklaus. Who's the greatest? And you know what our answer would be.
Yeah.
In your world, I'm going to say that it's probably Elvis, Beatles, and Rolling Stones. That may be your Nicklaus, Hogan.
Yeah, I would
Tiger.
say, for me, the Beatles are probably number one because they opened opportunity for me. Elvis, unbelievable. Just unbelievable. And I think then, after that, I would say Sinatra.
Okay.
Because Sinatra, just his style. And, Sinatra, Clint Eastwood, Ben Hogan, they all had the same thing, really. They were independent thinkers. They took their talent and they drove it, but they drove it the way they wanted to drive it. They're all independent thinkers, and they took the rough with the smooth.
Right.
I always said, when people interview me about certain things, I take responsibility for my failure and my success. I believe it was my failure and I believe it was my success. I take full responsibility for it all. I don't blame anybody else, because if I wanted to blame somebody else, I'm wasting 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's all I'm doing. I'm just wasting 5 minutes blaming somebody.
Yeah.
I accept full responsibility, and those boys did too.
So you think with the Beatles, if they took off like a rocket ship, like nobody's ever seen before, and we'll probably never see again.
We'll never see that again, no.
You think if they have a more steady trajectory up, they last longer, or it was just that's what it was? They were a 10-year band, and that's what they're going to be. I mean, it's a long time, but it's
I think in the record business, if you get 7, 8, 9 glory years, that's you done. I mean, the Rolling Stones, although they've gone on for 50 years, they're not in their glory years, are they?
Yeah.
They're out there playing massive concerts still, which is unbelievable. But they're playing Get Off of My Cloud. They're playing songs from 60 years ago, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, they're playing a few new ones too, but
that's when you go get a beer, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think history would suggest that with a lot of those artists, although they can have longer careers and still go and do concerts and play the hits and do all that, their glory years, if you get 7, 8 years, that's you. You've done well. You've done really well. Because it moves. As generations come, it moves.
So do you think the Beatles recognize that, or you think that it was just time? Lennon and McCartney needed to go on their own.
I think it was time. I think Yoko had come around, and although everyone now denies that Yoko kind of split the Beatles, I don't know that she split the Beatles, but she moved Lennon's mentality. And whereas Lennon and McCartney were joined at the hip for all those years, when Yoko came in, John went somewhere else, and so the songwriting partnership was obviously beginning to be more and more distant. And I think it was time.
Yeah,
Sure. Not sure.
I remember when they played on the roof, though. Did you ever see the footage of them play?
Yeah, I think that recording to Get Back is one of my favorite recordings of all time. So.
Yeah. And they stopped the traffic in the streets, because everybody was wandering around the streets looking, because it was on the news, everyone's looking, trying to, see where this noise is coming from, and they know it's the Beatles.
I thought that was a really neat fact from your book where you said that, is it NEMS, is how you say it, NEMS?
Yeah.
And that was where Brian Epstein's office was, right?
Yeah, and I was interviewed there for my first job.
That's
in
amazing.
The record. NEMS stands for North Eastern Music Stores.
Okay.
Oh,
Huh.
that's good.
Yeah, so Liverpool, obviously,
Okay.
Northeast.
Okay. I'm really bad at English geography, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
You explain
We'll
that.
bring
well,
a
you
map
know
next
Birmingham's
time.
in the middle of the country now, don't
Yeah.
you?
I do.
And Warsaw's 9 miles away from it.
That's right.
We are almost out of time. You have to come back for a part 2 because we didn't cover Impulse, we didn't cover Jive. You've got 87 hit records. We didn't talk about them, so I feel like we need to do a part 2.
Absolutely.
We just
I
scratched
never
the
knew,
surface.
by the way, that I had 87 #1 records until a young girl from college. They did this.
Interview a few years ago. Yeah, I remember
they
it.
did this thing on me, and she said, "Do you know how many #1 records you've got?" And I had, and I went, "No, I'd say more than 30, less than 40." And she went, "No, 87."
Wow.
I was flabbergasted.
Wow.
Yeah, that
You know,
just
so,
shows
hey,
how it wasn't about that, was it? It just shows how it was about you living your life and doing what makes you happy. It wasn't about the numbers. That's impressive.
Yeah, I didn't. Whenever I had a #1 record, the day that it went to #1 was great. And the staff at the record label would probably have a little drinks or party or whatever, or sometimes there'd be a function with the artist. But the following day, I'm looking for the next one.
Right.
That was
That
great.
makes sense.
It was #1. It's #1 now, and hopefully it'll be #1 for 2 or 3 weeks. I gotta go find another.
Well,
I love that. And instead of sitting in your glory and being like, oh my God, I'm here, I've made it, I've done it. You're just like, all right, here we go. We're expecting this, so let's keep going.
Let's go.
This is what we're here
Get
for.
ready.
see, to me, that's the common thread of great producers, great artists, and Hogan, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he just kept trying to chase perfect, and
I'm a big fan of Hogan, by
well,
the way.
he would be a big fan of yours too, because I think that's kind of the same mentality he had was, it's never gonna. I won one U.S. Open. I'm not gonna sit there and ride around in a car and show my trophy. I'm gonna go after the next one. So
Yeah, and you don't talk too much.
Yeah.
I kind of thought that, as I learned and grew in the industry, I thought, I'm not going to talk too much. I'll wait until there's something important to say and then I'll say it. And I love that Hogan, he don't talk too much. He just goes and does it. In my book, good on you.
I haven't learned that lesson yet.
You keep talking, Judd. It's obviously working. It's going well.
Well, we really appreciate your time. Like Josie says, we're going to have you back, and we may talk Sue into, because I know she's a cool life too, so we want to talk about that. But we really appreciate it, and great meeting you. And we'll
Thank
see
you
again
very
soon.
much.
Thank you.
And thank you for the invite.
Oh,
It's an
absolutely.
absolute pleasure.
Absolutely.
And my wife is far more talented than I ever was.
Well, and your daughter's more talented than me. So
Yeah,
we're a good company
and
here.
Josie too.
Yeah,
She's, I'm not playing golf with Josie that often because I just get whooped.
I did that once, and I'll never do it again.
Yeah. Well, we stick with that one.